Today is May 25th, 2018. My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview with Matt Roark in Bartonville, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
Lawrence, Kansas.
Lawrence, Kansas. When's your birthday?
June 14th, 1966.
1966. Who is your father?
Pat Roark.
Pat Roark. And your mother?
Louise.
Louise. And her maiden name is?
Kane.
Kane, okay. Did you go through school in Lawrence?
No, father was in law school, his senior, or final year, they don't call it senior year, I guess. Final year of college, and he graduated that spring of 1966. Or excuse me, it would have been 67, yeah. And so, as close as we can remember, we moved to Bartlesville 1 week before my first birthday.
Okay.
So, I was born on the 14th of June, so, you know, we think we moved to Bartlesville around June 7th of 1967. So, technically, you know, I was only in Kansas for 11, almost 12 months.
Yeah, okay.
So I had my first birthday in Bartonville.
Went to Bartonville High School?
Yep.
You graduated what year?
1985. So the name change had just occurred and the schools had just combined.
Yeah, okay. In school, who was your favorite teacher?
I don't know.
What did you do for recreation in high school?
Actually, it's probably Earl Sears taught my shop.
Earl Sears?
Yeah, wood shop class.
Okay.
A long time ago.
What did you do for recreation in high school?
Did Boy Scouts for a few years. And then played some soccer.
You climbed Circle Mountain?
No.
Climbed the mound?
Drove up it.
You drove up it?
In my Jeep.
What'd you do up there?
On Circle Mountain?
Yeah.
I just mainly went up the back way when it was snowy and whatnot, and they said that it was too dangerous to go up it. So I thought, oh, that's an invitation. Go do it anyway.
You climbed the mound?
No.
What'd you do after high school?
Went to college for 4 years.
Where'd you go?
Well, went to NEO for a year. Spent too much time up in Kansas. So, came back and went to Wesleyan for a year. And then from there went to OSU for 2 years in Stillwater.
What'd you study?
Finished up, I was doing business.
Okay.
Business degree.
And you received your degree what year?
I received my degree in adult studies in the 90s from Oklahoma Wesleyan.
Okay.
Because I didn't finish in 4 years, and so I decided I need to do something else for a while and come back to it.
Okay. Now, when did you join the Air Force?
June 7th, 1991.
Why'd you join the Air Force over the Army, Navy, or the Marines?
I like the fact that they expected their people to think. You know, and I didn't feel like being on a ship at sea.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that talked to a number of different recruiters, and, you know, just based on what they had to say, I felt like Air Force would probably be the better fit for me.
Okay. Where'd you go for your basic training?
Lackland Air Force Base.
Lackland. Tell me about basic.
Probably my most first, I remember about 5 o'clock in the morning, we spent the night at a hotel off base, and got up way early. They had breakfast at the hotel for us. Nothing fancy, but beginnings of the days when they just had little breakfast areas instead of an actual restaurant. But anyway, so show up at base and it's still dark out. And I just remember we were sitting on the bus wondering what to do, and the bus driver doesn't say a word. And the door's still shut, so we figured, well, it's not time to get off yet. But everybody's just looking, everybody wondering what was going to happen, and the bus driver just looking straight ahead. No information from him. It's civilian, apparently. Anyway, so all of a sudden we hear this clicking noise. And we're all looking around. And then we see this hot hat bobbing by the window. So we're like, well, he's not very tall, whoever it is. And then climbs on the bus and gets to the top step before we actually see him over the guy in the front row because he was short. And then he started yelling. And the voice was a lot bigger than his body. And poor guy sitting in the front row was a big, tall, black guy. And he just started yelling at him right away. Guy was just sitting there. And he's like, looked like ended up being a pretty nice guy, but a quiet guy actually, gentle giant sort of personality. But he just picked on him, and then he said, "You're in charge." And the poor guy looked scared. He'd probably never been in charge of anybody in his life, and he's told he's going to be in charge because he's the big guy. And then next he picked on a guy that had long hair. Said he didn't know there were any girls on the bus. So we all knew that we were all in for something. And I already had it wasn't a regulation haircut, but it was, for not being in the military, it's pretty close. And he picked on me, asked me if I was trying to brown nose him. And of course I was just like, I know I'm going to get a haircut anyway, but no reason to push my luck with long hair. So, so I knew we were all in for it regardless of what we did.
So what type of training did you have in basic?
It was just 6 weeks at that time. It's been expanded, but basically it's just made up of learning military and Air Force history, learning how to fold your t-shirts and socks and underwear in perfect squares, and not that later we've all figured out that wasn't the point, being square, but rather learning to follow orders and ensuring you follow those orders correctly. And so, but that was really the gist of it. It's just learning to be able to follow orders and directions. And of course we learned how to march, which is ironic because I almost never marched after basic. Being in the Air Force, you just climbed on a plane, or climbed in a vehicle. So never did much marching after basic, but that was just part of it, learning how to follow directions and how to work together.
What's your most vivid memory of basic training besides the bus?
I would say it was the day we had a little time off, and so we were cleaning the dorm and making our beds, writing letters to home, whatever. And so I guess it was a weekend. You kind of lose track of the days. You just know, you kind of count how many days till you graduate, but you don't, and how many weeks, but you don't really care or think about whether it's Friday or Saturday or Sunday, because it just kind of, they got something for you to do every day. So it just kind of blends together. But on this particular day, our TI came in, dorm guard, yelled that he was coming in, and that was part of the procedure. And he walks in and says, "Guys, we've invaded Iraq." And then he turned around and walked out of the room and left us in there for a couple hours to just stew on that. And we never did hear anything more till we got out. But it had us all just kind of looking at each other like, uh-oh. Did we time this good or did we time this bad? But, so we didn't hear any more about who, what forces had invaded or whether it was air power or ground power, or we didn't hear anything, just that we'd invaded Iraq. And then he turned around and walked out, and we were really just looking at each other. Nobody even knew what to say because we didn't have enough information to form an opinion.
Yeah. So after basic, where'd you go?
Went to Champaign, Illinois for my technical school, as we call it. And I was joining POL, which either stands for Petroleum Oils and Lubricants, or as I later learned, is referred to affectionately as Party on Location. Basically, if it needed fuel, we took care of it, whether it was a generator, a vehicle, aircraft. And we also took care of liquid oxygen, nitrogen, and so we had to learn how to provide that on an actual base, and we had to learn how to provide that in camp type conditions out in the field. And so the party on location part was that we worked really hard, but then when work was over, we had fun to relax as a group. Most of the shops ended up being fairly good size because of how many people it takes to, deal with that diverse of a mission. But that tech school was 6 weeks, and from there I went to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona.
Davis-Monthan. Now, when did you discover that Saddam had invaded Kuwait?
When I was at tech school.
Tech school.
So, we literally, I think, weeks had gone by between the time that we got that announcement and we actually graduated. And to be honest, I'd already forgot about it by the time we graduated because, they intentionally and basically keep you busy all the time. And when you hit the bed, you're ready to go to sleep. And, first thing in the morning, they yell at you and you got to get your bed made and everything. And so, even when I got out of basic, that wasn't my first question to anybody because I'd already kind of forgot about it. Just, most people just survive in basic is what you're thinking about, not what's happening in the outside world. So, yeah, I just kind of learned about it from the news and from people that at tech school that were further along in their training and, were getting information and stuff. But, so, it was kind of after the fact. So, I didn't really have any emotion because it was history by the time I heard about it.
And what'd you do at Davis-Monthan?
It was a large base. We had 3 A-10 squadrons. We had customs. We had a couple squadrons of BC-130s and had some F-16s, and so we had to keep all those fueled. And then that's also where the boneyard is, which is the affectionate name for where they store old aircraft that have been taken out of service. And so we had to provide fuel for that operation as well. And so we had, on average, 100 guys in our shop.
What unit were you assigned to?
Well, there were a couple flying squadrons on base, but the base mission was under the 355th Fighter Squadron.
Okay. What was your job in the unit?
Within 4 years, I did a couple different jobs, but the primary job was just fueling aircraft on the line, as we called it.
What type of fuel does the aircraft take?
Most aircraft take what we call JP8, which is just a little better grade of fuel than what civilian aircraft use.
Well, when I was in Vietnam, we had JP4.
Yeah.
What's the difference between JP4 and JP8?
The chemical makeup of it, and JP4, you can run it fairly easily in a vehicle, in a diesel vehicle. JP8, on the other hand, is a little cleaner, and the combustion's a little bit different.
Okay.
You know, the flash points and how hot it burns and so forth. But
And you were at Davis-Monthan how long?
I was there for 4 years.
What was your average day there?
Well, I was considered myself a pretty hard worker, so I spent the majority of my time on day shift. You get up, go in the morning, you get a briefing about what's going on that day. Some days you'd be informed it was going to be really busy, and to expect to eat lunch while driving your truck. Other days it might be what we call a down day for training, other than actually flying the planes, and so on those days it'd be slower. But you know, whatever it was, that's what we'd be informed in the morning what to expect. And then you always have to inspect your equipment every morning, make sure everything's working right, and then you just get after it for 8-10 hours, however long the work day was.
Driving a truck, is that a fuel truck? Okay.
Yeah, but at some points I worked in what we call our fuel farms, where you receive and store your fuel, and then you issue it to the truck, and the truck actually goes to the aircraft.
Okay. Now, at Davis-Monthan, is that near Tucson?
It is in Tucson.
Okay. What was the reaction of the local people in Tucson to you being in the military?
The people of Tucson loved us because it was a large base, and we added quite a bit to the local economy. And so, you know, when the series of bracks was coming around, you know, the mayor of Tucson and other prominent people were very concerned about the prospects of possibly losing the base and the negative impact that would have, because the base originally was outside of town, but because it was such a benefit, town really grew up around the base, and there was the majority of the area around the base, you know, was housing and shopping, and you know, I mean, town really grew up around the base, and so they were very concerned when the base realignments were going on and closures that, you know, they'd lose the base, and so they did everything they could to try to protect the base.
The base is still there?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's growing. Customs has big buildings on base now, and they used to just have some planes, but now they actually have border patrol guys that actually drive in the trucks that are stationed out there as well.
Now, you were there 4 years?
I spent 4 years there.
Now, what about, did you take part in Desert Storm?
Mm-hmm. 93, we performed a mission they called Shock and Awe, and
Shock and awe. What'd you do?
I fielded the planes that went and flew over Baghdad, and came back with nothing on the wings. But no, at that time I was assigned to King Fahd Air Base in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. Spent 3 months there. You weren't allowed to stay in country more than 3 months at that time.
Why?
King said so.
Oh.
You had to have a command position to stay longer. I think there were some generals and colonels and general staff that stayed for longer periods. You know, people doing not diplomat stuff, but you know, the liaison people develop a relationship, and so it's.
And when did you first go to Arabia?
Well, I only went once to Saudi Arabia, but that was in 93.
93. You recall the month you went?
February through December through April.
December of 90.
December of 92 through April of 93.
Okay. Where's King Fahd base located?
Daharan.
Daharan.
Yeah, that's the same. That's the base that was the subject a few years later of a terrorist attack.
Yes.
Cobar Towers.
You stay on base, you stay in Cobar Towers.
Everybody stayed in Cobar Towers. I used to jog by the building that got blown up.
Yeah. Have any contact with the local people there?
Not much. Occasionally you could get a pass to go off base, and so there were a couple times that I went downtown and got some pizza or something, but it was really restrictive. And if you got that opportunity to go off base, it was unusual. I think I got to do it twice, and we just went and got pizza and came back, so we probably weren't even off base but a couple hours.
Yeah. Have any female members of your unit?
Mm-hmm.
No.
And they didn't go off base.
They didn't go off base. Okay.
Now I know of that I didn't deal with directly, but I knew a couple that worked in our contracting office, which that means they're the ones that go off base and contract for receiving local food items and that type of stuff. And a couple of them were women, and so when they went off base, they had to wear the local garb over their uniform, and so and they had to be the passenger, and they had to sit in the back seat. So it was kind of awkward because sometimes they were mid-level officers, captains, majors, and they'd have a airman or airman basic driving the car and sitting in the front seat and supposedly in charge, and you'd have a officer that had some years and experience under him that was female, that was subjected to having to sit in the back seat. So between the two of them, she would definitely be in charge, but as far as anybody off base was concerned, it was the other way around, which was really awkward, more so for the poor young guy driving the car and whatnot, because he knew he was only there for window dressing, and yet in town everybody was talking to him instead of the gal, and then, so it created a awkward situation for both of them, because they had to play the game, but it wasn't really the reality of what the relationship was between them. So it was always interesting. So they tried to keep that to a minimal because it was just so awkward. But occasionally it was necessary to go have face-to-face meetings with people.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you have face-to-face meetings with any of the Arabians?
I mainly dealt with what we called over there TCNs, Third Country Nationals. Okay. So in those days, I think it's changing with the current leadership in Saudi Arabia, but at that time, most of the manual labor in the country was done by people from India and Pakistan and whatnot, who came over and would send money home, much the same as people from South America do here in the States. They'd make money and send it home to family members at home that were needier situations than them. And so I would occasionally talk to some of them that, were able to speak English, and usually it was while working, so that, they were typically fairly short conversations, nothing in depth. But
what was their attitude towards you?
Oh, the TCNs, they thought it was great, because their job was to bring fuel on base to us, and foodstuffs and everything. So, we provided them with a job in essence, and so, they were glad to have us. But, I think some of the general populace in the cities were not necessarily so welcoming, but because of the mission and so forth and local customs, we mainly stayed on the base. So the majority of them just saw the fence and heard the planes fly over the city, and I think for the average citizen over there, that was probably the extent of their interaction with the U.S. military at that time.
Now, are you still with the 355th at this time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in the Air Force, you individually or maybe as a group will go on what we call temporary duty assignment, or TDY was what we called it for short. And so, you know, when I went to Saudi Arabia, usually I went by myself. Occasionally, 2 or 3 guys would go together that actually knew each other, but, you know, I met people from bases all over America for the most part that were over there, and so I met people from a lot of different bases.
Okay.
But it seemed like most of us came from, at that time I always joked, it seemed like everybody that went over there came from southern bases. I met a lot of people that were stationed at Nellis and Las Vegas, and a lot of people I met were from the bases in New Mexico or Southern California, and so it's kind of like just going from one desert to another.
Yeah. What was the weather over there in Arabia?
It was either hot or hot and sandy.
Dust storms, sandstorms?
Yeah. I don't know why anybody would want to live over there. I always figured there's a reason why they're grumpy. There's always sand blowing in the air or sand in your shoes, and you know, I figure they have a right to be grumpy living over there.
So what airplanes were you refueling?
Well, on that particular trip, I was fueling F-15s, F-18s, British Mirages, French Tornadoes, F-104s, and occasionally some AC-130s, and then there was some scattering of different type helicopters that would come and go.
And what missions these airplanes were on? Well, what were these airplanes going?
Most of them were Operation Southern Watch, but
Now, what's the Southern Watch?
you know, just I never understood it all. It just seemed like they were always changing the names, but the mission was always the same: keep Saddam playing nice. But you know, in my 22 years of service, there were so many different names they used, but it was still the same thing. So I kind of got to where I ignored them because I thought it was a waste of time. Really, the only reason they changed the names from time to time is that the goal of the mission would change from president to president, and you know, based on what generals and president and Congress would work out, they'd change the name of the mission. But it was really always the same thing. So I always thought it was just political gamemanship to change the names from time to time. But you know, to the average guy on the ground, whether you're in the Army or the Air Force, it seemed like we were always doing the same thing.
And you were in Arabia 3 months?
Uh-huh.
And then when you left Arabia, you went where?
Back to Davis-Monthan.
Davis-Monthan. And how long were you in the Air Force?
I spent 4 years on active duty. Got out for 2. Regretted getting out. But at that time they were reducing forces, and so I couldn't get back on active duty status unless I'd been in a critical field, which I wasn't. So looked at my options and found out I could join the reserves, which was not the same thing at that time, but it was, you know, it was similar. So I joined the reserves at Tinker Air Force Base.
What unit was it, Tinker?
I was with the, oh gosh, I'm going blank. 507th.
507th.
Mm-hmm.
What? Squadron Wing.
It was 507 Combat Logistics Supply. Excuse me. I did that for 6 years.
And what is a combat logistics supply unit? What do they do?
At that time, they did not have a peacetime mission. They only had a wartime mission, and so their job was to go into a war zone and set up a bear-based mission. So, that would mean that once the perimeter was set up and the tents were up, that we would come in and bring all the necessary things to set up a supply warehouse. We'd literally go from just an empty tent or building, depending on the situation, to being able to operate. And so, basically, it'd be like, flying in a Walmart.
Yeah.
One day there wasn't nothing there, and a couple of days later, you were issuing stuff out to people. So that meant you came in, you brought in the boxes of goods, whatever they are, and you brought in the computers, and you set up who was in charge of the shop and who was the low man on the totem pole and everything in between, and where the front desk was and where you parked the forklift and the whole 9 yards. And so basically, we were trained just to go from nothing to 100% in less than a week. And so all the training and everything we did was based around that, going through how do we do this, what do we do, and so forth. And so,
Where'd you have your summer camps?
Well, being in the reserves, you could get good summer camps. I did summer camps in Guam, Germany, lots of nice places while being in the reserves. But we always worked, and so we always get offered good trips because the place you go paid for you to be there. The training was for our benefit, but while we were there, we'd typically help them move a warehouse or set up, reorganize an existing one or whatever, which is similar to what we would do when we're setting one up from scratch. And so, we typically go in and they'd tell us what project they had that needed doing, and then leave it to us to figure out how to get that mission accomplished. They'd say, well, here's the building we need to do it in, or what have you, but we'd actually move everything around, keep track of what we had and where it was, and the whole 9 yards while we were moving. And so lots of times we'd actually still be issuing to people while we were moving it around, which in itself is a complicated thing. If you're being asked to issue something to somebody and it's like, well, wait a minute, that's on Frank's forklift, where's he at? And then you get some of it off of there, and you have to keep track of how much was on there before and how much should be on there after you issue some of it off of the forklift that's moving from one building to another. So yeah, it'd be quite interesting sometimes. But
Were your summer camps in Guam and Germany the same thing?
yeah, it just we would just fall in with it, whatever their mission was, and help them out. And so their missions are always different because they'd be different aircraft. So, getting parts for a large cargo aircraft is a lot different than parts for a fighter jet. Yes, they all have tires and hydraulic struts and stuff for the landing gear and everything, but other than that, there's a lot of difference.
How long you in the reserves?
I was in the reserves for 6 years.
6 years. And you were discharged when?
From there, I got out, and the following weekend I joined the Tulsa Air National Guard.
Okay.
And did 12 years at the Tulsa Air National Guard.
Okay.
So literally, on one Sunday, I out-processed the reserves, and the following Saturday, I am processed. The Tulsa Air National Guard.
What'd you do in the National Guard?
I spent 6 years working in a civil engineering squadron, performing supply function solely for them.
Is that in Tulsa?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Tulsa Airport.
Is there an army there on, is it 46th?
They're down the street.
Yeah, okay, okay. Now, your summer camps with them, what was your summer camp in the National Guard?
Some of those, most of those were here stateside. Occasionally, we would go overseas. Some of the guys in the unit would actually go perform their summer camp in the Middle East occasionally. But typically ours, due to budget cuts, both at the federal and state level, we either performed at home base in Tulsa or we'd go to a location in Arkansas. That was a regional training facility for guard units.
Okay.
And then we also went to Gulfport, Louisiana for some our inspections and stuff. Just before I got out, we went to Ohio one time.
What'd you
to
do
another
there?
regional training area. But lots of times we'd go to deployed locations, as we would call it, for our inspections. So as part of the inspection, the inspectors were seeing that we were doing our job in an unfamiliar location. So, we were having to set up temporary warehouses for, everybody was, not just supply, but, weapons and the mechanics and, our vehicle ops people, you're all having to use somebody else's building and learn where their stuff is located and so forth. And which, in reality, when you go to war, that's exactly what happens. You're in a new place and you're having to, the things you're familiar with are not down the street where they are at home. They're somewhere else. And so, that's part of the process is learning how different places are set up and why and what that does to improve or hinder your mission.
So you had how many years in the military total?
I had 22.
22.
They were all in one of the three versions of the Air Force.
Yeah.
Because, Guard and Reserve went from just being for part-timers to being just as important as active duty as, the numbers of personnel in the different aspects of it were changed based on Congress's decisions. And so, you went, because it became where if you're a higher ranked enlisted or an officer, you might go to a deployed location, be in charge, whereas back home, you may have, in the old days, just sat around, played cards and goofed off. And so, some of the first people from different bases around the country that went over as reserve or guard members came back and were telling guys, you better start learning how to do your job because you might be put in charge somewhere and you don't want to look like a dummy. And so a lot of guys are having to make sure they actually knew how to do their job, even though they maybe only did it one weekend a month. They better know how to do it because they might get deployed somewhere and have 10, 20 or more guys looking at them going, what do we do? And you couldn't say, I don't know. I just play cards or whatever. You can't say that anymore. So it got a lot more serious regarding training and, just personally developing yourself as a member of the military became a lot more important.
Would you join the Air Force again?
I can go back tomorrow. Getting up dark 30 and working 12, 14-hour shift. And then maybe getting woke up in the middle of the night by stuff other people that were still working were doing. Don't necessarily miss that, but all the rest of it, camaraderie and knowing you're doing something to serve your country. And I'd do that tomorrow.
I'd like to do a word association. I'll give you some words and you give me your reaction. First one is basic training.
Glad it's over.
Saddam Hussein.
Good guy to be dead.
Saudi Arabia.
Hot.
U.S. Air Force.
And people you want in the sky above you.
Margaret Thatcher.
Good example of leadership.
George Bush.
Okay.
How do you want to be remembered?
As a patriot, doing my part to do what we've done since the founding of our country, serving and protecting so that our wives and children and elderly can be safe in their beds.
Where'd you meet your wife?
I met my wife in Tulsa at a church.
Now, what kind of work you do now?
Construction.
Construction. Okay. You have a construction company here in town?
Do construction and property management in Bartlesville.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about? Anything about your military career? Anything stands out in your memory?
I would say probably one of the most impressive moments for me was hearing the story of a guy who received Purple Heart for a mission that he performed in which he received a traumatic brain injury. And the people he was with were doing a humanitarian mission in which they were training local Iraqis Afghans, I'm sorry, wrong country, in different farming techniques that would help them be more effective in an arid environment than what they were currently doing. And were involved with an IUD in a roadside attack, and he received a brain injury when explosions were going off very close to where he was fighting from behind cover. And a few weeks later he went back from a forward hospital, went back into the fight, or to help. It wasn't fight literally, but went back with his unit, and then a few days later had a similar attack and received another brain injury, and so he was forced to come home from that one because they realized at that time that he'd been hurt worse than they realized with the first attack and then the second attack. So I mean, just as sports people have concussions and so forth, that was essentially what had happened to him. Was his brain had got jostled around too much inside his skull. So he didn't, to look at him, he had no physical injuries, but the damage to his brain and psychologically was pretty severe. But was able to participate in his Purple Heart ceremony, which he received at our home base. But people from the unit that he'd served with, which I'd have to look it up, but I believe they were from Ohio, had a group of them that came down just for that hour-long ceremony to honor him, because as part of those two attacks, he'd gone from behind cover and drug people out of, his coworkers out of vehicles and stuff. And but what impressed me was, before he went there with them, he didn't know a single one of them. He was the only person from our unit that had gone on that mission, and so he didn't know any of them until he went. But when they were being shot at, even though he'd only known them a few weeks, he went out, risked getting shot at and dying to drag somebody that he only slightly knew. He knew their first and last name, and where they're from. That's about it. You know, I don't even know if he knew whether some of them had families or not. But you know, he risked his life for those guys, and so you know, to me, that's just an example of epitomizing the military mission and service above self. You know, he just risked his life, and he had a wife and kids at home. But you know, he was dragging these people he didn't know, and they were going to let him come home after the first injury, but he's like, no, till they go home, I need to stay too. And he went back, even though they'd offered to let him go home early. And so that always impressed me.
Well, this is an excellent interview. I want to thank you for your service and thank you for the interview.
Thanks.
And again, this is May 25th, 2018. My name is Joe Todd. This has been an interview with Matt Roark in Bartonville, Oklahoma. Thank you.